You're listening to the School of Connection podcast, episode 11.
Welcome to the School of Connection podcast with Rana Ulk. Each week, she'll connect you with the stories and wisdom of people doing extraordinary work that's changing the world. If you're hungry for growth and love inspiration, you're in the right place. Each episode will give you practical insights and ideas that you can take action on starting today. And now, your host, founder and chief connectologist, Rana Ulk.
Hello, everyone. Look, today is a special day because I get to interview someone. I know what you're thinking. That's why I'm here, right? Except I'm not interviewing someone every week, even though we release these episodes once a week. It's actually been 2 weeks since my last interview, and so I am excited. It's my favorite thing to do. And not only that, but today is extra special because I get to interview someone who is passionate about reaching out to others, and encouraging more real and human connections in the world, just like me. His name is Chad Littlefield. He's an author, a TEDx speaker, co-founder of We, that's We with an exclamation point, and the We Connect cards. And the best thing of all, you guys, he is an enemy of small talk, just like me. I love that. But these things are all about describing what he does. So we're going to find out more about who he is and why connection is important to him. Chad, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's such a gift to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I know that I went through that list of things that you do, but how would you describe yourself or introduce yourself if you're in front of a group of people?
One of my favorite ways maybe is to ask if people have seen the movie Patch Adams with Robin Williams, where he becomes a doctor to promote the quality of life over quantity. And so when I was a little kid, I saw that movie and I had my whole life figured out because I was going to be Patch Adams. I was so enamored with his ability to heal people through human connection, through just this deep empathy and care and compassion and humor with other people. And so on a playful note, I like to say that I'm Patch Adams just without the scalpel because I took a chemistry class in college and that taught me that I did not want to go into medical anyway. But I still had that drive, this obsession and curiosity with the power of human connection and what it does to both our minds and our bodies and our hearts. And so that's a pretty abstract description, though. So most people, if I say I'm Patch Adams, are like, "Yeah, but wait, what do you mean? What do you do?" So the quick way, if I'm on a plane and we're deboarding,
there you go.
is share that leaders give me a ring when they want to amplify a culture of connection, belonging, and trust. And so I work with organizations and oftentimes B Corps or conscious companies, conscious organizations, to amplify that culture of connection, belonging, and trust through speaking workshops and ongoing consulting and coaching with them.
Awesome. So what about the name of your organization? How would I describe that? Did I do it right? Like We with an exclamation point?
We with an exclamation mark.
Okay.
We invoice people at We and Me Inc. So that's the official title, but We is the brand, and that name came to be from, if you know what a mind map is, you picture a bunch of bubbles all connecting to each other in this web or network of ideas. So when we were first developing and building We created a mind map of all the impact that we wanted to create, all the people that we wanted to serve, all the ways that we wanted to do that. And we left the center bubble blank. And so we stood back from the whiteboard and looked at it and said, okay, what's at the center of all of this? And what came to both of us, my co-founder now, Will Wise, and at the time was working with somebody else as well, came up with the word we. It's a group of people. And since then, it's very much shifted, what we share and the way that we offer it is inviting people to shift from this me-centered mindset to a more we-focused or we-centered mindset.
What do you think has necessitated this mission of yours? What do you think has necessitated this mission of yours?
Ooh, necessitated it. So many little moments and stories, but one of them for me that was a spark to creating this long before we was even a thought. I was picking up my grandmother from the airport in Boston, Massachusetts, and was on this bus, and it was this, packed with people, 60 or so people, like crammed in there like sardines, and yet there was not a peep. It was just this like cold silence on the bus, and I was so struck by that. And at the time, I was really thinking about and churning over this idea that I like to call positive social risks, which is what I loved about connecting with you, Rana, is your life is filled with what I would call positive social risks. But anyway, I was thinking about this idea, and I thought if there's any place to test whether this idea of stretching yourself outside of your comfort zone with the intention of making a positive impact or connection with somebody else works or has some power or some impact, a cold, silent bus on the way to the airport in Boston through traffic is definitely that place. And so I had turned down next to me, and there was a guy wearing a hat that said the Jason Project on the top. And I just very genuinely curious turned down, and I was, my heart started beating. I was like the nerves of breaking that silence, like there was social risk present. And I just turned down and I said, "Hey, I'm really curious, like what's the Jason Project on your hat all about?" And this guy looked up and just lit up. He went from like totally in his own world, tuned out, nothing else exists, to, oh my goodness. And so he just started telling me all about the Jason Project, what its mission was, how he worked with Robert Ballard, the guy who discovered the Titanic. Like all this life started coming out. And I still get Christmas cards from Henry was his name.
No kidding.
So it was that moment where I was like, man, it's this, what stands between connection and isolation is often perceived social risk. I don't even think the actual risk is often very high. It can be, right? It's possible to put yourself in a situation where the actual risk is high, but 99% of the time, the perceived risk is much higher than the actual risk of
absolutely.
And the
absolutely.
benefit of what comes on the other side of that risk is pretty cool.
Yeah. And obviously I can relate to that. Approaching strangers, no matter how many times I've done it, approach a stranger to say, "Hey, can I have a deep conversation with you?" It's just like you described, the butterflies in your stomach, the heart beating. And I really love the slogan, "Just do it." I use it a lot, and you just get to that point where you say, "Just do it." And as soon as you do, within 2 seconds, that you realize it's all fine. So,
yeah. Yep.
So having the experience of and continually challenging yourself to create those moments between yourself and others, how would you define, or how do you define connection?
Wow.
It's hard, right?
It's very, very hard.
I'm not asking for a formal definition here,
yeah,
but
sure.
can you describe how it feels, for example?
Sure. It feels when you're very similar. I think when you're really connected with someone, very similar to being in a flow state. If you're familiar with Csikszentmihalyi's idea of flow, where you lose track of time, you're just totally immersed in something else. And so I think real connections. So we've got lots of connections in the world, right? We're very, very connected with computers that live in our pockets. But I wouldn't call that, in the context that we're talking about now, I wouldn't call that meaningful human connection. And so one of the best ways that I would describe it, and I think this counts as a definition and answers your question of how it feels. Sherry Turkle, who wrote a really great article in New York Times called The Flight from Conversation. In that, she shares this metaphor of, and I'm probably amplifying the metaphor a little bit more than she did, but picture yourself on a hot summer day and you're just super thirsty. You haven't had water in 2 days, and you are going over and sitting on a table nearby is this ice cold glass of water, condensation on the outside, and you go to pick it up. You're so thirsty, and you just pick it up and you go, you just get this little sip, a little tiny sip. That is what the red notifications on our phone, that's the type of connection that digital connections often give us. Whereas, picture the same scenario, hot summer day, you haven't had water in 2 years, you go up, there's an ice cold glass of water, condensation on the outside, and you just take this huge gulp of water. And it's just like satisfying, quenching, thirst quenching experience. And I think real meaningful connection has a similar feeling to that gulp, that when you leave a conversation or you leave time spent with somebody or a group, you feel full. There's this fullness that is connected with the idea of being truly connected with somebody else.
I love that. And I love the metaphor, because what I think you would probably agree with is when you go out and start meaningfully connecting with people, like that stranger that you talked to with the Jason Project, right? People truly are thirsty. They're, or as I would have said, starving for meaningful connection. And yet everybody has this invisible barrier, this perceived risk that's keeping them from doing and connecting in a way that they really wish to. And I'm of the opinion that some of these people also, the strangers that I approached who were starving for meaningful connection, didn't really think about it or realize it themselves until they had the conversation with me about connection. And so I think that it's partly going back to what necessitates these conversations right now. It is not to blame everything on the technology part, but the fact that we are so digitally connected and kind of obsessed is partially to blame for it.
Yeah, I think that it's part of what contributes to it, but I do think that like many other tools in our world, I think technology is a tool, and like a hammer, we can choose to use it to smash our finger or build a house. And those are options, those are choices that we have. And so I think there is the element of choice connected with how we connect in that isolation. So I don't totally want to pass the buck there.
Absolutely.
I do one other, so my co-founder of Will Wise, if I was channeling him into this conversation right now, he would probably, he wrote our book, Ask Powerful Questions. And so he has a ability with words, or what I'm trying to say is he would give you a formal definition to what is connection. I bet. And if he did, it would be something along the lines of being in a conversation where both parties mutually, they're willing to know each other. They are really seeing each other. They're really hearing each other. They get each other. And then at some point, they're actually with each other. And so it could attach other words to each of those. But I think it's all of those things are very process oriented, which is, I think, important to bring out or highlight or identify when you're talking about meaningful connection or meaningful conversation, because I don't think it's about the content. I actually believe that you can talk about the weather with somebody and have it really matter It just most often doesn't because we're not curious about it. It's obligatory small talk that we're filling with time. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that if you were really curious about the weather, you were genuinely curious how it impacted somebody else, etc., like content aside, you can create that connection with somebody.
Can you connect with people without being curious?
Ooh. I am continually testing this theory. So I'm developing a new model right now. You mentioned I'm an enemy of small talk. I would say that my personal mission on the planet is to gently eradicate small talk. And so one of the models that I've been creating around that, if you picture a 2x2 matrix on a spectrum of small talk to conversations that matter. The way that I can define and pick that apart is draw the y-axis, and from a scale of high degree of mutual curiosity and a low degree of mutual curiosity. When I went to label each segment, I was thinking of all right, so the conversations that matter that have a high degree of empathetic curiosity, we'll call those conversations that matter. Conversations that matter that have a low degree of curiosity, I would say, are need to have conversations. Mm-hmm. So these are ones that you might need to fire an employee or talk with a child about something that's really uncomfortable for you to talk about. And so you might not be curious, but that conversation really matters, right? And there's care and associated with that. Anyway, skipping ahead to the on the scale of small talk with a high degree of empathetic curiosity, the only name that I could come up with that idea was impossible conversations. I don't actually know if it's possible to have a small talk conversation if there is a high degree of empathetic curiosity. So that's a long-winded.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a long-winded way of saying right now, and I'm still testing and playing with this idea a little bit, but as I've been working with groups, I've been challenging people. I've been laying that model out and challenging people to try to have a small talk conversation with somebody by pairing up and following your natural, genuine curiosity. And so far, nobody's succeeded.
I had no idea you were working on this, by the way. I mean, hey, audience, you should know, Chad and I have had one conversation prior to this, and that was it. So we're almost strangers, but we have something in common and topics in common. But no, that is interesting that, because it's something that I've wondered as well when I'm trying to talk to people about connection and teaching them how to connect. I wonder often if you can teach curiosity. It seems as though some people are born more curious. I think all of us are curious as children, mm-hmm. and some people lose it. So I don't know if you can take them back to that time in their lives when they were children and teach them curiosity. But I still, nevertheless, will insist that there are some of us who are just naturally more curious. And even if I've lost some of it, I still have plenty left. So, there's no cure for it in my case.
There is no cure for curiosity. It's a wonderful disease. I would offer a reframe. So you mentioned before we started recording here, you mentioned that you had just started reading Ask Powerful Questions. And I'm grinning really big because that book was actually me and Will condensing down ideas that we worked for an organization called World in Conversation.
Okay.
And our job was to train a group of facilitators to walk into a room of 6 to 10 people and facilitate a dialogue on things that people aren't supposed to talk about, like race, gender, culture, mm-hmm. long-term conflict, for 90 minutes with the sole purpose of skipping the headlines and really empathizing and understanding the other. Mm-hmm. And transforming conflict into collaboration. Anyhow, that facilitation training was this really intense deep dive into reteaching people how to be curious. Because if you've ever seen a kid, you have kids, or you've been around kids, they're walking around the world asking why. They're so curious about the world, and then at some point, and perhaps our education system has had a role in this. I don't think, certainly not to blame, but has had a role in saying, find the right answers. There is a right answer. It's not about exploring things. It's like, know this information to pass X test. I do think that's actually changing quite a bit, but the reframe on curiosity is as far as like, is it the nature versus nurture? Is it a gene, or is it something that we can actually cultivate? I think that curiosity is much more like a muscle, that if we don't use it, it atrophies. And if we use it, we can strengthen it and become more curious. And I actually don't think that it, unlike a muscle, I think it can be strengthened quite a bit faster than a bicep or a tricep.
I like that. I think I definitely have to agree with you there. So we talked about positive social risks a little while ago, and the feeling that I would describe that, oh my gosh, I'm going to approach somebody, my heart's beating, I have butterflies in my stomach. There are lots of reasons for it. It's I think ultimately fear, and fear of rejection, fear of some sort of negative consequence. The person, I don't know, being really mean to you, really. It's a vulnerable feeling. And so I'm curious, since we're good at that now, we've kind of mastered that, what else makes you feel vulnerable?
Interesting. So I don't know that I've fully mastered it, but for me, a positive social risk actually is so dependent on the person. And so the idea is that it's stretching your own interpersonal comfort zone, wherever that is. And so I know people who a positive social risk is calling to order pizza instead of doing it online. Like that is what brings their heart rate up and stretches them to that outer limits of, outside the learning and growth zone into that panic zone of my palms are sweaty and I'm noticing this biological reaction going on. So your question to me though is now that because I would agree with you that my threshold is probably a bit higher now for this work, especially seeing that a decent amount of my work includes getting up in front of 1,000 strangers and speaking, sharing ideas, and opening myself to their own perceptions, judgments, etc. So there's plenty of perceived risk there. So I would say that actually still, even though I love that and speak dozens and dozens of times a year, that still is what most reliably gets my heart rate up. And I think it's one of the reasons that I actually love it, because part of my job is inviting people to stretch outside of where they're comfortable, try things that they may not have ever tried before. And so I better practice that myself, and rather than just asking other people to practice it. And so each year I take on one big comfort zone stretch experience or project or something. And so a couple of years ago, I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And so that was maybe that's a positive antisocial risk.
That is a risk though. From what I've heard others describing too, that would be a challenge. Describe that. What was hard about it?
Oh my gosh. I run an organization whose mission is to create conversations that matter. And I signed up for a 10-day silent retreat where you couldn't look at anyone. They collected phones, books, journals. There was no writing. There was no reading. It was literally you sitting, meditating for 10 days.
Okay. I didn't know. Now this is definitely off my list. Hats off to you. I did not know that you don't get to read or write either.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That would be torture for me, frankly. How'd you survive it?
So, what I was surprised about was it was easily one of the hardest things that I've chosen to do.
Yes.
Maybe not the hardest thing I've ever done, but one of the hardest things I've opted into doing. And I think one of the reasons that it was so difficult, I thought it was going to be because I couldn't talk. I couldn't, quote, connect with other people. That wasn't it at all. I connected very deeply. There's lots of connection happening with myself. One, the hardest thing was the lack of being able to do something. And so if on a personality scale of being an accelerator to being a brake, I fall very hard on the accelerator end of things, right? So if I hear an idea within 10 minutes, it needs to be put into action or I'm not satisfied. And so that was really hard to be able to have. I probably had 7 years worth of ideas, projects, new tools and products to launch for all the stuff. And I wasn't even able to write them down, and I would forget them the next day, and it all just faded away. And it was actually the deepest and best practice in letting go of all that stuff and not being so attached to the things around us in the world. But not doing anything was by far the hardest part.
Wow. So obviously you learned a lot from it.
Yes.
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? So one of the reasons I ended up doing it anyway was my business partner, Will, had done several of them. I think that was his 10th 10-day course that he had sat over the course of his lifetime. Right. So this was over the last 30 years. He's sat in 10 courses. Right now, I'm not going to write it off right now. Absolutely not. I have no desire to do it again. No way. However, I still choose to meditate regularly. It has a very deep, when I'm actually being deliberate about it, when I'm not failing at meditating, which is often enough, it has a very big impact, though, on my own ability to focus and be present with the people that I'm working with and the work that I'm doing and involved with. It didn't make me want to give up sitting quietly for sure. But
I think we could have a whole half hour or more conversation just about that. I'd be very curious about there I go, curious. I want to know all the little details about that retreat, but maybe we'll save that for another time since we have a whole audience listening to us, right?
I think your curiosity is a gift that you give to the world, Rana. Thank you for it. But we can round 2 another time. Yeah,
right. So when you have these Connect cards, which for those of you listening, which we're going to get that information later, but when you go to the website that Chad is going to share with us, there are Connect cards that have questions on them. What is your favorite question, or one of them? I know it might be hard. They're your babies, right? You can't really pick and choose. But what is one favorite question that you like to answer or ask?
Wow. That is a good question. We might have to add that to the deck. What's your favorite question?
Okay.
So for those of you listening, I'm a very visual person. So just to sink this in a little bit, the deck of We Connect cards that Ron is talking about, 60 little square cards, different colors, and just a question on one side and then action on the back. And so the questions are color-coded into questions that tend to be a little bit more fun and light. Green cards, blue cards tend to have questions that are a little bit deeper, and then purple cards encourage some level of self-reflection. We created that purple category specifically to invite introverts into the room and give permission and space for people to think before they respond. So that said, picture.
Thank you for explaining that.
What's that?
Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So out of the deck of 60 questions, I have lots of questions that I love. But I think the one that is most usable in almost any context of life is, what is life teaching you right now? My question, what is life teaching you right now? Because I can ask myself that at any given moment when somebody cuts me off on the highway. What is life teaching me right now? Patience, perhaps. Or I can ask it to my wife when she comes home from work. What is life teaching you right now? I usually don't greet her with a question like that. Touch base first and check in, but it's a pretty potent question. I will say my wife's favorite question is in the green category, and it's how well would you get along with your clone? And the reason...
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, you had a visceral response to that question.
Yes. Not in a good way.
What's that?
Not in a good way for me. I know I'm very hard on myself. I work on it all the time. And so, I imagine that I think my husband would say I'm hard on him too. So I don't know. I'm really grateful that my husband is in many ways the opposite of me. Let's put it that way. We complement each other. I think if he was like me, I don't know if we would have lasted 15 years. So that's a great question.
Well, right. And it is a part, and maybe it needs to be a blue question, actually. I mean, you can answer it playfully, but I think it actually does cut to the heart of something very deep, which you just mentioned, which is I am hard on myself. And a lot of people are. Most people are probably their own worst critics. And so I bet
everybody listening right now can relate in some way to that. Either they know somebody or they are themselves.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And in some moment in the next 48 hours, if you're not relating to it, and you're paying attention to the voice inside your head and the stories that we have about ourselves, you will notice that show up. So
yeah, for sure. So if people could describe you in just one word, Chad, what would you want them to say?
I have because of my work, people do describe me in one word often. And the way that shows up is I'll be working with a group and somebody will come up to me afterward and they'll react. They'll say something about what just happened. And it's usually it's related to me, right? Sometimes it's related to the ideas, but oftentimes who we are being shows up louder than what we're saying or what we're doing. Right. So, and I noticed this when I first started speaking, 100% of the times that I would speak, somebody would come up to me and verbatim would say, "Oh, Chad, I just loved your energy. Thanks so much for bringing this energy into the room. You just had this way of like taking up space in the room and just creating this like little bubble around us that we could connect in." And so that word energy, something that I totally would never, ever, 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 ever have used to describe myself as somebody who tends to be a little bit more left-brained and logical. Energy is like, well, what is that? What do you mean? I can't point to it. I can't touch it. And yet I've since learned to own that word and appreciate that word a little bit. Because I think what people were seeing in me, and me being a harsh critic of myself, I wasn't letting that voice in, was this compliment of who I am and how I show up. When I show up and I'm energetic, I'm not... when I'm speaking or working with a group, I don't need to like jump up and down 10 times and like pretend to be energetic with the crowd. Like, I really love life and I'm really passionate about the possible connections that can occur when I work with a group. And so that energy naturally shows up. And I think it is a gift to people. So
you're in flow when you're doing that.
There you go. Yeah.
Right?
Flowy. How's that for a word?
There you go. Well, I think that was actually one of the things that I observed about you. And I'd love for our audience to go and watch your TED Talks. They're really awesome. But you are very energetic. You take up a lot of space. You gesture a lot. You have a lot of hand movements. You walk around. You move around. And I was wondering myself, it's almost as if you're acting out a play on stage. And I don't know, are you like that in your personal life too?
Yes. Friends know to keep at least a 3-foot bubble so they don't get hit accidentally. I actually, I had in college, I had, most people in most colleges require you to take a public speaking course. Mm-hmm. And it was the lowest grade I ever received in a college course, was in my public speaking class, because I had a professor. I had a professor who said, who just absolutely hated the hand motions, and he tried so hard to get me to keep my hands by my side when I was talking, or use he invited me to use my hands as batons, directing me to keep my fingers tight together and like very robotic, and I couldn't do it. And I said, "Hey man, this is a part of who I am, and I think I think that despite your opinion of it, I think that it will be good in the future. So I'm just going to get a bad grade and keep being me in this moment. And so
Good call. Good call, Chad.
Yeah.
I like it. So I could talk to you forever and ever. I really, really appreciate this. Before I ask my very, very important question, I have a second most important question, and that is, where can people find you, find out more about you, see you? Where would you send them?
Thanks. That is a generous question. So our website, unfortunately, we.com cost about $2 to $3 million. So we passed on that one. So the website, we is we and .me, like 3 words, we and .me. And so that's the easiest place to find out about everything. If you're curious about the book, ask powerful questions, create conversations that matter, just became a #1 Amazon bestseller. And so you can find it wherever. And so that's one place. And then the We Connect cards can be Googled as well.
So repeat, because I think there might have been a little connection, brief connection snafu when you were saying the website name. I know we.com, I imagine that was taken, but we and?
Yep, we and .me, WEAND .me is the website. You can also Google my name, Chad Littlefield, or Will Wise as well. That works too.
You know, there is another very famous Chad Littlefield, right?
There is.
I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah, for those of you who do Google, if you remember the American sniper Chris Kyle, who was murdered, he was murdered with a friend whose name was also Chad Littlefield. Which,
yes,
I was riding my bike across campus. I was teaching at Penn State, and I looked on the TV. Their CNN was playing in a building, and the line scrolling on the bottom read "Chad Littlefield shot dead," and I stopped my bike, got off, and checked my pulse to make sure.
No, I mean, we shouldn't laugh about it, but yeah, that is what comes up. I mean, that's a very famous terrible event. So for those of you who do Google, make sure you Google Chad Littlefield, we and me if you have to. So
there you go.
Or Chad Littlefield TED Talk, even better.
Yeah.
So one last thing, Chad. I love for the audience, our listeners, to be able to take something from our interviews that they can apply into their lives. I mean, like if they're getting out of their car, if they were listening to this in the car, or if they're at home, wherever they are, today they can apply something. They can take an action that would reinforce what they learned today. For you, what would that be? What would you recommend for them?
I would invite people, and this is like not something you need to even wait an hour for. Like the second that this podcast ends, you can choose to do it. We talked about curiosity a little bit. I would invite people to follow your natural, genuine curiosity, both with people and in your world. But that's not concrete enough for me. I told you I was left-brained. So the tool that we actually teach people in terms of how do you actually do this, I call it the awkward elevator tool. And so the reason I call it that is if you were in an elevator and you had to connect with this person, what would you do? What would you say? What would be the icebreaker or the conversation starter for that? And the tool that we teach people is to follow your natural, genuine curiosity by finding something that somebody is wearing, carrying, sharing, or presenting, and ask them an open question rooted in your natural, genuine curiosity about that.
Awesome.
And the reason I would invite people to do that, if you want a reason to actually take the social risk of doing this, is that most of us, when we walk out into the world, into public, we do not look the same as we did when our alarm clock went off that morning, right? From the moment our alarm clock went off to the moment that we showed up in public, we made conscious choices about what we put on our body. So be it a wedding ring, a necklace, a watch, the way that we did our hair, the way that we didn't do our hair, all of that says something about where we're at in that moment and potentially even who we are. So you think about the Jason Project and Henry's hat. Yeah. This was his symbol of saying, hey, this is a piece of who I am in the world. And so it's in an elevator. It's this safe route to ask questions that actually access a much deeper deeper conversation, deeper part of who somebody is.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Loved it. Everybody, I hope you take that to heart. It will change your life. It's, cultivate that curiosity, connect with somebody today, connect with somebody tomorrow. Maybe, you're listening to this at night, whenever it is, but it will change your life. And I also invite you to connect with me, you guys. Before we go, I want to let you know I have a special email address just for you to send any comments or questions or whatever it is you have to say, even if it's just hello. I want you to send me an email if you feel like it at hellorana@theschoolofconnection.com. So until next time, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the School of Connection podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and visit schoolofconnection.com/podcast for the show notes.